Welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video. Wanted to do a weird one here talking about my first experience with the Mandela Effect. This was years ago, before I even knew the Mandela Effect was a thing. And for those who are unaware, I'm sure everybody's heard about this thing now, but the Mandela Effect is kind of this feeling of like, you know for a fact you saw something or you learned something in your youth or what have you, and then years later you discover you were completely wrong. For those who haven't looked deep into it, I did for this video. Apparently it's called the Mandela Effect because Lady Fiona Broome said she had, she's like some paranormal researcher, she had reported that she knew for a fact, absolutely guaranteed, that Nelson Mandela had died in prison in the 1980s. But he was very much alive well past the 80s, 90s, and he actually became president of South Africa. So, like, no, that is definitely not true. Nelson Mandela did not die in the 80s, but this lady was very much certain she had heard that, and that spurred on the idea of the Mandela Effect. I think for myself, the first time I recently encountered the actual name, the Mandela Effect, was the Angry Video Game Nerd. He did a whole video about this, and he was sort of mentioning examples, and one that he said that totally lit a light in my head was how the Berenstain Bears, the kids' book series, for whatever reason, we all collectively seem to have thought that they were called the Berenstain Bears, like Frankenstein or whatever, Berenstein, I suppose. But it's always genuinely been spelled as Berenstain Bears. That's just one of many examples. There's also going around an idea that Tweedledum and Tweedledee in the Disney Alice in Wonderland movie had propellers on their hats. They didn't. They had flags. But we all seem to be in agreement that, yeah, no, I totally remember in the movie, never mind artist inception or, different versions or what have you, we're all convinced that Tweedledum and Tweedledee had propellers. They didn't. They had little flags. Now, I haven't gone on the internet to search this out, but I know that there are some people who have started to delve deep into what is the Mandela Effect, how many different lives has it touched, and for myself, I know that there are Star Wars ones, a good one being 3PO's silver leg. A lot of people just don't realize, I guess because the action figure has all gold, 3PO had a silver leg. And the real classic, the one that everybody seems to have recently got into a debate on online, is when in The Empire Strikes Back, slight spoiler, Darth Vader reveals that he is in fact Luke's father. Everybody, not everybody, a big chunk of the audience out there, the collective mind hive, seemed to think that Vader said, "Luke, I am your father." But that's not true. He didn't. And that is another Mandela Effect. I can actually blame Chris Farley for actually saying that into a fan, and that's why we all think it was Luke, I am your father. But I was then reminded of my own early version of a Star Wars Mandela Effect. This goes back to the 70s, way before I'd heard any of these terms, and way before it got me kind of fuzzy and unclear about what have I actually experienced and what do I really know. I remember very specifically I was in the high school library, or possibly elementary school library now that I think about it, going through some books and finding anything to do with science fiction. And they showed pictures from Star Wars. And I recall it was either this book or maybe a Starlog magazine of the time. It was some science fiction devoted journal. They were showing images of the Tusken Raider. And in his hand was the weapon that we've all seen that's got a club on one end and a flange on the other. But in this picture, I swear, it was a club on both ends. It looked almost like an old-fashioned timey telephone where it's like the club on one end and then the other one scooped round almost like a mouthpiece. I guarantee you I saw this version of the weapon I've photoshopped it here to make something kind of like what I was thinking, but basically, again, think of the old-fashioned telephone, that design for the handset, but with those two clubs and a metal bar in between. And the little caption underneath said something like a Sandman holding a Gaderafi stick. And it's important to note, it was definitely Gaderafi. That's going to come up later. Because then I got the Kenner action figure for the Sandman, the Tusken Raider, and he is holding his brown plastic weapon. But it's the one with the flange on the other end, the one seen attacking Luke, and it's very clearly described in the Kenner action figure listing as a Gaffy stick. Nothing to do with Gaderafi, it's a Gaffy stick. And I thought, oh, I guess that was another weapon that the Sand People used. Some had the Gaderafi stick that I saw in that photograph, and others had this Gaffy stick that had like a mace-like flange on the other end. Okay, sure. These were all based on a Fijian weapon. When they were making the film, it was a club weapon from Fiji that was, I think, called the Totokia. Got it from Wikipedia, so I hope that's correct. The weapons that the Tusken Raiders are seen carrying around, and they had several, by the way. The one that we all think of is with the Kenner action figure, and I've got in my head the Gaderafi stick, but there were others. There were ones that had just the flange on one end and like a kind of rifle butt on the other. There were a variety of different weapons that the Sand People in the films were using. But in years since, as I have looked online, I have been starting to get more and more confused about, hey, wait a minute, whatever happened to the one that I saw, the Gaderafi stick? How come I never see that picture ever referenced again? How come there's never anybody talking about the other club weapon used by the Sand People, the Gaderafi stick? Am I not remembering this correctly? Can't be. I did notice in the intervening years, well past the 80s, after Star Wars had faded from the view for everybody, we don't really see that much reference of Star Wars in the late 80s, early 90s. I remember after that phase, when maybe the newer action figures were coming out in preparation for Special Edition being released in the mid-90s, more talk about Star Wars, especially the action figures. And that's when the Gaffy stick, that I remember from my Kenner days, also started being called the Gaderafi stick, which I thought, no, you're missing an A. Not the Gaderafi stick, you mean the Gaderafi stick. Nope. These are all references to the Gaderafi stick, which is similar to the Gaffy stick. This was stuff I was being able to finally find online in various searches, and I thought, well, that can't be right. I remember it being a Gaderafi, and I definitely remember two spiked ends on either side. Why am I not being able to find these? Now that the internet is around, why don't I go and dig up that picture of the Gaderafi stick, and that way I can prove to everybody, yeah, this is what I was referring to. And these were the years when I just started to think, okay, maybe I'm going crazy. I know for a fact the Gaderafi stick was a thing. Why can I not find any references to it online? I became rather puzzled. It's like, okay, am I forgetting things? Have I started to lose my memory at the ripe old age of my 30s? No, that can't be it. As it turns out, it was the Mandela Effect. For whatever reason, I had convinced myself I had seen a version of the weapon of the Tusken Raiders that was the spiky weapon club bit on either end, and it never existed. And I have to get happy with the fact that, yeah, this was what I had remembered instead. I did stumble across an old 70s picture of a Tusken Raider, and the way he's holding his weapon, I think this was the picture that I saw. I think this is from The Art of Star Wars from the 70s. Regardless, this image where the Tusken Raider's holding his weapon kind of differently, he's not holding it aloft in a threatening pattern. In my child head, I must have seen the ball end on the pit bit behind him and thought it was the same thing in his hands or something. I don't recall, but I think I saw this image, and for whatever reason that imprinted on me, it's the spiky ball on both sides. And why did I read Gaderafi when it was called the Gaffy stick from Kenner? Not a clue. I don't really know, but I'm willing to accept that something happened there, and I guess I was wrong. Maybe the Gaffy stick was some of the cast and crew's label for it, and then somebody else mistakenly called it the Gaderafi stick. And in my reading of this magazine, this book, whatever it was that showed the character holding the weapon that unusual way, maybe I had misread Gaderafi stick as Gaderafi. I don't know. I'm willing to accept anything could have happened there. Years later, when people started to talk about, oh yeah, these very strange Mandela Effect things that have impacted people, I thought, hey, that's what happened to me. I'm weirdly subject to a Star Wars Mandela Effect of my own creation. I made up in my head this version of the Tusken Raider weapon when it never really existed. And now anytime I see somebody dressed up as the character, or if I see statues or figures or prop makers making that little weapon, I always think to myself, I wonder if I could get maybe somebody to make me the Gaderafi stick that I had in my head. I'll look into somebody who's into metalworking and get them to actually forge me a Gaderafi stick so I can put that to bed. Interesting. Well, anyway, thought I would share my weird Mandela effect that occurred to me as a kid, and I don't know anybody else who ever encountered this. So I guess it doesn't qualify as a Mandela if it's only in one crazy person's head. Who knows? Sure. But with that, and no further answers for you, I'll just say we'll see you down the rabbit hole.